Good afternoon. We had a very exciting couple days, actually, right in this hotel on Monday and Tuesday, doing our first Maritime Baltic. The Potomac Foundation has been involved in simulations here in Eastern Europe for the last couple of years. We've done a number in Poland, Sweden, Latvia, and Estonia, and look forward to perhaps doing more in the future. So this particular simulation focused on the Baltic Maritime, but it was in the context of the full air-land battle going on the land. So while we only looked at that in this piece, we had the backdrop, and other simulations have focused on that part of the battle. Our objectives are here. Essentially, we wanted to stay in line with the strategic defense review objectives to do kind of a systematic analysis to support armed forces development, whether it's here in Poland or elsewhere. Our second objective was to try to help to reinforce the bilateral Polish-Swedish maritime security objectives and do that in a U.S. and NATO context. Now, since it did focus on Polish and Sweden, we kind of kept them out of this particular scenario. We could address it in the future. But I think these types of partnerships are pretty important, and you can just see the other day that Swedish-U.S. discussions over using the Patriot are just underway, were announced the other day. Next, as you mentioned, the Orca submarine decision is coming up, so it's a chance to look at the strategic opportunities adding this new submarine capability to Poland. How can it help Poland? Which missions can it perform? How to think through how to use it, and then how can it be used cooperatively with other countries such as Sweden. And finally, it was to look at the overall implications in this particular battle, this concern with a red threat in the Baltic and the military operations that would be going on, as I said, in the context of a larger air-land battle going on the ground. Here's who we had involved. There were essentially 4 teams on the blue side, as we typically call it in gaming, Polish Command and Polish Navy. And so Polish Navy was taking the actions and getting direction from the command. Swedish Navy was there, and notable, the chief of the Swedish Navy was in attendance for both days of the game and contributed greatly to the dialogue and interaction. And then we had a NATO and U.S. command, and we had representatives from NATO, and we had 2 retired U.S. admirals, one who will follow me here in just a minute. And then finally, adjudicating the outcomes as we went through the event was a red team that was run by us at the Potomac Foundation with some assistance. We addressed and broke the problem down kind of into 4 different scenarios. There's a lot of different utilities that a submarine can bring to the Baltics. And so just trying to do a sequential event, we didn't think would really get at all these issues. So we broke it into 4 kind of vignettes, as we call them. The first one would be prior to any hostilities, where there's a need for really strong intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance activity, looking around the Baltics, make sure you understand the situational awareness, the intent is at least as best you can. The next scenario looked at deterrence in the sense of a submarine with missiles, whether that could be a long-range strike in a strategic sense to affect an outcome at the strategic level, or whether it's down to more of a tactical sort of interaction. The forward interdiction is then a more classic type of naval battle where you're trying to either sink submarines or ships in terms of impeding some objective that the red opponent wants to get into. And then the final one was a soft insertion, and this had to do with countering an amphibious invasion and trying to put forces on shore to help and assist targeting and to kind of turn the tide on part of the scenario. As you'll see on this chart, this is a map of the Baltics. The hegemon simulation that we use runs on top of Google Earth, so if it looks like Google Earth, it is, and we break it down from there. And you'll see that in this case, we're dealing with what many of you understand is a very complex maritime environment, from the different types of depth, salinity. It's a very complex environment to understand and operate in. And we ran the 4 scenarios. This shows about the third point of the scenario, where there had been an invasion of Samar to the north, a threatened invasion of Gotland, which didn't actually occur. That was just a feint. And you can see the various position of Swedish and Polish forces. And so there was different maps of this as we went through the scenario, showing the various aspects. And from that, in a game like this, it's not really intended to say here's an absolute answer to anything. It's more to get insights, takeaways. It's the interaction between the people. What will NATO do? What will Poland do? What's the thinking? How can Poland and Swedish, for example, work together? And so that's what we kind of took from it. And what I want to do now is introduce Admiral Walkwitz. He has some experience with the U.S.-Swedish collaboration in the past, having brought the Gotland to San Diego to practice for a couple of years back when he was in operational command. And so he'll walk through kind of a few slides to illustrate and discuss the observations we took away. Okay, Admiral?
Okay, good afternoon. And I always want to take the opportunity to say hello to all my cousins out here. It's great to be back on this side of the world and try and make some new acquaintances with some of you that we're probably related and don't even know that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover some of the aspects and the conclusions that the team came up with. But I'm going to also caveat some of them with my own observations, having worked closely for the 2 years that the Gotland was in the United States working with the Third Fleet. Okay. The first thing is that it's obvious, I know it's obvious to you, but it became obvious during the game that Poland, Sweden, and the U.S. have a common maritime security interest in the Baltic Sea. In playing this game, we essentially shut off the straits coming into the Baltic, so the Baltic became essentially a very, very large lake. Okay. And in that lake, there are 3 primary players. And this exercise showed that 2 of those players were going to actually be the blue and 1 was going to be red, okay? And initially during the game, in the first moves, both Sweden and Poland worked in their own national interests in only playing on their sides. However, as the game progressed and we brought initiations that would have them cause to go talk to NATO, ask for NATO's assistance or advice, go to the EU, then what we saw was both navies coming together and working in collaboration as an allied force. Okay. Now, one of the major takeaways, and I think this feels true in all aspects of combined warfare and warfare where you're going to have disparate navies or disparate armies or different air forces working together in a coalition or as allies, is that you have to come up with a common architecture that has to be developed, implemented, and practice for interoperability to enable the success of the employment of your forces. For instance, communications. Okay, when you have Sweden, which is a non-NATO country, and you have Poland, which is a NATO country, okay, how do you communicate between the forces when you have encryption going on? How do you bridge that, okay? Water space management, especially for submarine forces. How do you separate each other so that you do not have a blue-on-blue engagement and you can operate jointly to carry out missions that may overlap? For instance, insertion of soft forces and protecting the submarines that are interjecting the soft forces into a battle area. How do you deconflict? How do you ensure that you mutually work together on that? And that's coming up with the architecture. And the time for that architecture is not tomorrow. It's not when the crisis exists. The time for that is today. To get together today and come up with that architecture and then implement and practice it. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, we get beyond just the programmatics of the game, but get into specifically what the submarines bring to the game, okay? Submarines are inherently survivable and flexible. They're also stealth. And when you're working in this environment that we have, where you have numerous white shipping going on, you have a very confined area, then you really want a weapon system that is flexible and survivable to be able to carry out the missions that are assigned, okay? Specifically, they are one of the best platforms for ISR, one of the best platforms for targeting and special ops insertions. And they function best as force multipliers in conjunction with other navies or surface vessels or air, even though those were precluded from being in this exercise, so it was mainly a submarine-centric exercise. Also, you have the availability to have cruise missiles in there. and other payloads. And the other payloads could be unmanned vehicles, both air and subsurface launched from a submarine, or mines, which are also precluded from this exercise, but these are capabilities that are inherent to a submarine, okay? The submarine also provides decision makers with a deterrence potential, mainly because you don't know where a submarine is. Just putting out the word in an environment that they don't know that you're there, but you've told them that you're there, well, that's going to cause them to think twice. That's going to say, well, maybe that might disrupt the timeline, and that timeline disruption may be enough to dissuade them from aggressive action. So this is another attribute that came out from the game, but it's also one that we know about in reality. And then a submarine force causes an adversary to allocate an inordinate amount of forces to try and neutralize that submarine. Now, I can speak from experience with the Gotland, which is an AIP propulsion system, which is different from your normal diesel and extremely different from a nuclear submarine. But this submarine, when it came to San Diego, we thought that we had enhanced our anti-submarine warfare capabilities, that we were going to have a fun time with this target from the other side of the world, and we were going to teach them how we could do ASW. Well, what came about was that we had to go back and review all our tactics, techniques, and procedures. We had to go back and restack our investments so that we could bring our anti-submarine warfare capabilities up to match that of the AIP Gotland-class submarine. So it caused us to change mostly all of our thoughts on how we could do ASW. So that was big, and I think that would be a big game changer in the Baltic if it was added to the submarine force that the Swedes already have on that. So that's a personal opinion on my part. That was not part of the game, but the game does say that you will have to allocate more forces to counter a submarine threat. Next slide, please. Okay, if we go through and we decide that we are going to purchase a submarine force, we want to be sure that we get a return on investment that's fully realized. Okay, and what do I mean by that? You have to make the investment for command and control, for the targeting. You have to ensure that you have the logistics trail to ensure that you have the availability, okay? You want to be sure that you pick a platform that you can put to sea. You don't want a platform that you're going to need 6 to get to the sea. You want a platform that has the reliability that if you buy 4, you're guaranteed to have 3 at sea, and the 4th one could probably be ready to go in a very, very short time. So that's something that as decision makers out there, that has to be put into your equation. And the training, okay? From my observation, besides the United States naval submariner, the Swedish submariners are second to none because they made and make the investment in training. And then payloads, okay? We didn't play with unmanned systems in this game, but that's something that has to be considered because that is a force multiplier for the submarine, which in turn is a force multiplier for your forces. So all those have to be considerations, so you need to take a look at all of that. And you need to take a look at how you can maximize the funds you have, okay? Can you team with another country or another service to, let's say, use their training facilities so you don't have to build your own training facilities, but go rent a training facility that you can use that has a similar platform that you have. So these are all things that you have to make the commitment to make the investment so that you have the capability not only today, but tomorrow in that force that you are procuring. And that brings us down to modularity. Okay? Modularity will give you the flexibility to take advantage of new technologies that you may have not already purchased, you may not have already thought of, or may not have been brought to maturity to actually put on the platform. But if you go with a modular type system where you can take out a system and replace it from an off-the-shelf advanced system, then you don't have to go back and expand the funds to retrofit that whole platform. So when you're thinking of, okay, we are going to go down the road, we're going to buy a submarine force, then you want to buy the submarine force not only with the ability to fight today, but be able to have the ability to fight tomorrow and not have to expend scarce funds to go back and do a retrofit, and then next thing you know, you have an obsolete force before you even have it being active. So you've got to have that modularity, and that's very, very important for the total cost. Next slide, please. Now, this is just a very, very high level, very short, because we are kind of constricted by time, overview of the exercise, which in my opinion, I probably learned more than anyone else, and it was very gratifying to me to see the players in this game, especially seeing that the Chief of Navy of Sweden was here actively taking a part with part of his staff, because they get it, and they want to be sure that in the future, because of the security requirements between Sweden, Poland, and the United States for this critical area, that they want to ensure that everyone knows the importance that they place in their submarine force and the desire to work with, team with, and go to sea with a submarine force from Poland if that's the way the Polish government decides they want to go forward. Okay. Now, there will be a final report in depth, written, not by me because I'm a naval aviator and I look like pictures, I don't do words. So this will come out at the end of November, and I'm sure it'll be made available to whoever, who wants it. And being very new to the Potomac Foundation, I have had the opportunity to read some of their papers, some of their analysis, and I think you'll find that it'll be in-depth, it'll be very informative, and it'll be something that you can use to look as you look forward and to see what your requirements are, what you want to do, and how you want to proceed in the future as a country and as a maritime force. But the team will be available at the end of this session. We're not going anywhere. We have most of us have until tomorrow to catch a plane. So we'll be here very, very, happy to answer any questions you have or to discuss any matters that you want to have. There's a plethora of experience in the team, and we'll look forward to listening to the panel that's going to be speaking right now, and looking forward to having any of your questions so we can see how we can help you in the future, and even expanding it to taking a look at future games and simulations that maybe just consider unmanned vehicles, or bring an air pitcher into this, or expand this. So there's great opportunities out there, and I hope that you all try and take advantage of them, and go ahead and when we're done with this, pick our brains, and we'll try and put out some great information for you. So thank you.